If you're doubting whether your current setup is compliant, or if you're noticing lost data in GA4 due to consent mode issues, then this is the video for you. In this video, I'm giving you my entire playbook for cookie banners and consent mode. We're skipping the theory. I'm going to show you step by step how to build this properly in Google Tag Manager. The strategy that I'm sharing today comes directly from the premium course I've been working on for the past few months. I'll put a link to that in the video description, but in this video you are getting the exact core processes I use in my daily work, completely for free. My name is Leon and I help digital marketers get trustworthy data. Let's jump straight into GTM. Alright, the first step in our process is to create a cookie banner, to install and import a cookie banner. I've created a free cookie banner that is targeted for digital marketeers. So if you're in digital marketing and reliable data is important to you, this is a cookie banner that really ticks all the boxes in my opinion. So you can download that via a link in the video description. If you follow that link, you'll get a zip file. And if you unpack that zip file, you'll get this folder. Right now it's Clearcookie version 9. I might release new updates in the future. And this folder contains a couple of files, but the file clearcookie.json, this is the file that you need to import into our container. So we can do that by going under admin. And by clicking import container, we're going to choose the container file. And of course, I'm going to navigate to the Clearcookie folder, the folder that I just got from the zip file. I'm going to choose the clearcookie.json. I'm going to say open. Under workspace, I'm going to choose the default workspace. And I'm not going to overwrite, because overwrite is going to remove everything that I already had and replace it with the new tags. We want to merge because we want to keep everything that we currently have and want to add in the new container. This is going to add in one tag called Clearcookie-banner code. Let's add this to our workspace. So under tags, I now have a new tag called Clearcookie-banner code. The first thing that I like to do is I like to change the name. If you look closely to this container, I like to organize my container in such a way that everything's easy to find. And because it's sorted alphabetically, everything has a number. I like to give every cookie banner consent mode related tag a separate number. So in this case, it's going to be 80. So 8001 consent mode cookie banner. Let's hit save and let's test if this cookie banner is even working. So I'm going to hit preview. Yeah, there it is. My preview mode is open and I immediately see the cookie banner. And this is a confirmation that the cookie banner is currently working. I want to show you real quick that if you press accept all, you kind of lose the cookie banner. But if you want to get it back into view, because sometimes you just want to test if things are working correctly. And if you want to test the first visit, you need to get that cookie banner back. You can do that real easily by going into your page and right click and then hit inspect. And please don't feel overwhelmed with all the code that you see here. We're not going to need this. We're just going to navigate into console here. And we're going to type clearcookie.reset with 2 brackets. Yeah, there you go. Clearcookie.reset with 2 brackets. And then press enter. And this will basically reset the cookie banner and simulate a first visit. And this will come in handy later on in our tutorial. So I wanted to show you this right away. Okay, let's go back into Google Tag Manager and let's open up the cookie banner code here. This cookie banner has a couple of sections. First of all, it has some settings. If we scroll down, we also have some styles. And I will not go into styling the banner right now because it will make the tutorial too long. But if you download the cookie banner, I will send you over an implementation workshop where I cover this in more detail, how you can style this into the design of your own site. And I really recommend that you do this because the cookie banner is often the first thing that people see on your site. So you want to make sure that your cookie banner matches the design and the language of your brand as close as possible. So first we have the settings, secondly we have the styles, and then thirdly we have the cookie banner code itself. So this is important if you want to translate or change anything in the cookie banner. Everything that is black here, you can just change that into your own language if you want to translate. And then it says don't add anything below this line, and we don't need to go past this line to change the banner. I cannot cover every setting in detail here, but I want to cover 2 settings because they are really needed to get the thing working. So the first setting that I want to cover here is privacy statement page path. And this is the path to your privacy statement page. Well, I have my privacy statement open right here. If you go back to the home page, in the footer, there is a link to the privacy statement. And again, I'm not going to cover this in detail here. I have included a section on this in the premium course that I've linked down below. But a privacy statement is really important. If you don't have a privacy statement, please go ahead, create a new page and write out what you do in tracking, how you handle data, etc. is really important in becoming compliant. Mine is linked down below here, and the page path is this part right here. So I'm not going to include the domain name, but I'm going to include this part right here. I'm going to go back into settings and I'm going to paste in my privacy statement page path right here. The second setting that I want to cover here is the categories. By default, this cookie banner has 4 categories. Functional are the necessary cookies that are needed to get the website working. Almost all websites have functional cookies, so you cannot disable these cookies. This is just a notice that we're using these kinds of cookies. Then we have analytics cookies, and on my side, I'm using Google Analytics, so I definitely want to get consent for analytics. I also have a section called embedded content. I'm going to remove it here, but this section is essentially there for people that use embedded YouTube content on their site, of embedded posts from Instagram, things like that, because you're loading things from outside and those platforms will be able to place cookies on your site, things like that. So you basically need consent for that. In this tutorial, I'm not going to cover this, but again, in the premium course, there's an entire workshop on how to set up embedded content in such a way that it is actually compliant. But for now, I'm going to remove this. I don't have YouTube videos on my site currently. I do have marketing tags because I have Google Ads and I have Meta Ads. So I'm going to keep this marketing section because this is going to get consent for marketing tags. Now that I have these 2 settings sorted out, let's hit save. And let me refresh the cookie banner again because I just clicked accept all. So I'm going to reset the cookie banner. Let's hit preview. And let's see if things are working as expected. So the cookie banner is in view again. And if I now press this button, it should go into the privacy statement right away. Yes, this works. I've made this cookie banner in such a way that underneath the H1 title on the privacy statement, you will have this privacy pane. And if people accept cookies, they will be able to navigate to this page and afterward withdraw their consent or change their preferences here. Again, that is a really important part of becoming compliant, is that people are able to withdraw or change their consent afterwards. And this is how I'm doing this with my consent banner. All right, now that I've set up a cookie banner, let's go ahead and set up consent mode. The first step of our consent mode implementation is what I call the 3-step formula. And this basically means that first we're going to load our consent mode signals. Then we're going to load what I call the base tags of the setup. And then we're going to load everything else. And by base tags, what I mean is this. So in my container, I have the Google Analytics config tag, the Google tag for Google Analytics, or the Google tag by Google Ads, or the page view tag, the Meta Ads pixel. These are what I call the base tags of the setup. I use the initialization all pages trigger on all these base tags. And by doing this, I ensure that these are loaded right after the consent signals, but before anything else. So before you proceed with this tutorial, go through your setup and ensure that all your base tags use the initialization all pages trigger instead of a different page view trigger. All right, to load our consent mode signals, we're going to make a new tag. And the first command that we're going to apply to the page is the default command. So I'm going to call this 8002 consent mode default command. And in the tag configuration, I'm going to go into the community template gallery. I'm going to look for consent mode. I'm going to use the consent mode template by Simo Hava. So I'm going to import that and I'm going to add this to my workspace. And the first thing that we're going to build is the default command. So that's why we're going to choose default here. This is the first thing that needs to load on the page. These are the fallback settings. So what if there are no other signals applied to the page? What are the fallback settings? And usually you set all these signals to denied. So let's go through the template real quick. So if you're using Microsoft Clarity for your analytics or Microsoft Bing ads, you want to enable this. I'm not using that, so I'm going to disable it here. And basically we're going to go over all the different signals and we're going to say denied to every signal. Except for functionality stores, so the necessary cookies and the security cookies, we're going to set those to granted. So these are the categories that are just needed to get the page working and to get a secure connection. We're going to leave those values static and set to granted. We're going to check the pass ad click information through URLs. This is a setting that helps you retain traffic source information and campaign information, even though there's no consent yet. And this is a setting, we're going to tick this box as well, that helps protect the privacy of your users a little bit better. We're going to leave this one disabled. That's really important for now. We're going to use that later on, but not right here. And in the advanced settings, I'm going to say 100 because I want to load this tag first. This is probably a little bit excessive, but I like to do things in the right order. So I'm just doing this as a precaution. And then the triggering, we're going to choose the consent initialization of pages trigger. And this ensures that this is loaded before all our base tags and before everything else in our setup. This is really loaded as the first thing in our setup. And that's really important for the 3-step formula. So let's choose the consent initialization of pages trigger and let's hit save. The second thing that we're going to load here is the update command. And the update command loads the current settings of our user. Well, the settings, the cookie preferences of our user are stored in a cookie. And we need to dive in that cookie a little bit to see where we're going to pull the settings from. So I'm going to accept all, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to hit inspect on my page. And again, please don't feel overwhelmed by seeing all the code. You don't really need to use any of it. We're going to go in the top bar right here, and we're going to go into application. And under application, there's a section called cookies. And if you open that up, you have different folders underneath cookies. And then you need to look for your primary domain. So I'm here on leonkortweg.com. So I'm opening up the section leonkortweg.com right here. And in this list, there is a cookie called Clearcookie. And this cookie contains all the settings of the user. So I currently accepted all categories, so both analytics and marketing. So this is where we're going to read our consent settings from. We're going to do that by using a couple of variables. So we're going to set up these variables first, and then we're going to create the update command. So I'm back in Google Tag Manager. I'm going to make my first variable. Under user-defined variables, I'm going to create a new variable, and I'm going to call this consent mode cookie preferences. And under variable configuration, I'm going to read from a first-party cookie. And I'm going to choose the name Clearcookie, because this is basically the cookie that we're pulling the cookie preferences from our user. And I'm going to choose the URL decode cookie box right here. And I'm going to hit save. The next variable that I'm going to create is pulling the consent for analytics storage. So I'm going to call this consent mode analytics storage. And under variable configuration, I'm going to choose the regex table. And as input variable, I'm going to choose the consent mode cookie preferences variable that we just created. And as a default value, this needs to load denied in all cases except for when it's granted. So we're going to make a condition here that says granted. Before we're going to do the condition, let's go under advanced settings and let's say ignore case. That's okay. Let's do disable full matches only, and let's disable this one as well. Okay, let's look at our pattern. So when is analytics storage granted? Well, let's go back into our cookie. Let me just zoom in a little bit here. So whenever there is the piece of text analytics true in this cookie, I know that analytics is granted. So I'm going to just copy this over into my variable. And because this is a regex table, I need to be careful with special characters. I'm just going to be extra careful here. I'm going to do a backslash on every special character in this piece of text. Otherwise, it might interpret this text a little bit different than we're aiming for. We're really meaning a literal quote and a literal semicolon. So that's why I'm adding these backslashes to the pattern. And this is the condition. If this piece of text is present in the cookie, then I know that analytics storage is granted, otherwise it's denied. So this is the first variable that we need. We're going to make another variable as well for our marketing storage. So let's make that one as well. So I'm going to go into new. I'm going to say consent mode add storage. Under variable configuration, I'm going to choose the regex table here. As input variable, again, I'm going to choose the consent mode cookie preferences variable that we just created. This is set to denied in all circumstances, except for when it matches a specific pattern, then it's granted. Let's look at the pattern later. Let's first set the advanced settings. So we're going to keep this enabled. We're going to disable full matches, and we're going to enable capture groups. Well, what's the pattern that needs to be present in this cookie for the ad storage, the marketing storage, to be granted? Okay, let's go into the cookie. Here is a section marketing-true, and if this piece of text is present in the cookie, I know that we have consent for marketing storage. So let's copy this over into our pattern. Again, I'm going to be a little bit careful. I'm going to do a backslash before all our special characters here to ensure it interprets it as literal characters and not as a special meaning. That sometimes happens within regex tables. So if this piece of text is present in the cookie preferences, I know that ad storage is granted. Now that we have created these variables, we can go ahead and create our update command. To create our update command, we're going to make a new tag. We're going to call this 8003 consent mode update command. In the tag configuration, we're going to choose the consent mode template by Simon Hava. We don't need to import it again. We already imported it, so it's under custom, and here it is. So we're going to use that. This time we're going to choose the update command. And again, if you're using Microsoft Consent Mode, or if you're using Microsoft Clarity for analytics or Bing Ads, Microsoft Ads, you can check this box. I don't use that currently, so I'm going to keep this disabled. This time we're going to pull in the settings from our user dynamically. So we're not going to set this to granted or denied statically, but we're making this dynamic. So we're pulling this in from our cookie banner. And we can do that by using variables that we just created. So under add storage, I'm going to use the consent mode add storage variable that I created. And we're also going to use that same variable under these two categories, because these are also linked to marketing. So add user data, I'm going to use the consent mode add storage variable that I just created. And under add personalization, I'm going to use the consent mode add storage variable also. Also, under personalization storage, I'm using the consent mode add storage because in my cookie banner, I'm referencing not only personalizing ads, but also personalizing the content of your site. So personalizing content basically means that a user visits a specific page of your site about a specific subject, and then they navigate back to the homepage, for instance, and then you personalize that homepage about that specific subject because you know that they're interested in that. So to do that, you need consent, and we're setting that here as well. So functionality storage, I'm setting that statically to granted, and same for security storage because those cookies are needed to get the website working. The last category that I want to change here is the category analytics storage. I'm setting that to consent mode analytics storage here because we're pulling the consent from the analytics category in our cookie banner. So now that we've set all these values, let's look at these settings. And again, we're going to use these two checkboxes. Please be careful that you're leaving this disabled. We're going to use that later on, but for now, you need to keep this disabled here. Under advanced settings, I'm going to set this to tag firing priority 50. And again, this is probably a little bit excessive, but I like to do things exactly in the right order. And by making this 50, I set the default command to 100. The default command will now load first, and then the update command will load secondly in line. And then under triggering, I'm going to attach also the consent initialization all pages trigger to this. So it's loaded before all our base tags and before everything in our setup. Now that we've set up a consent mode update command, let's hit save and let's test the setup. So to test the setup, let's go ahead into our page. Let's right click and inspect. Let's go into console again and let's reset the cookie banner. So I'm going to go clearcookie.reset and then with 2 brackets. And after I've reset the cookie banner, I'm going to refresh the entire setup by hitting preview again. And this is basically the first visit scenario. The scenario where a user lands on your site for the first time and sees a cookie banner. They haven't given consent yet, they haven't accepted, they haven't denied, but there is no consent yet. So let's go into the tag assistant and let's look at our consent tab. So this is the tab that will show us the consent signals on our page. And if I move through the timeline, this is from bottom to top. So this is the timeline in chronological order when loading the page. And I can see that on consent initialization, I'm loading the default command and the update command. Default command is loaded first. So this is where I'm loading the everything denied. And the update command is then loaded. And because there's no consent yet, it's all set to denied. This is exactly how I want it. And then on initialization, the current state is set to denied. And this is exactly how I want it. And if I now press accept all, and at this stage of the setup, I still need to do a manual reload. We're going to fix that later. But after a manual reload, I can see that now, so this is the second page, the reloaded page. If we go into this again, so we're consent initialization, we're loading default and update. So the default command sets everything to denied, but now the update command sets everything to granted because the consent has now been updated, and the consent, I've accepted cookies, accepted both analytics and marketing, so everything is set to granted. And on initialization, the current state is granted. The next stage is to make sure that the tags in our setup actually listen and obey these settings. Because currently, it doesn't really matter. All the tags in our setup are still loaded when there's consent, but also when there's no consent. So we're going to make sure that all our tags in our setup obey these current settings. So to make sure that the tags in our setup actually obey the settings that we apply to the page, we need to get the consent overview. And by default, the consent overview is actually hidden from your container. So to enable it, let's move over to admin and let's go into the container settings. And let's tick this box, enable consent overview. Let's hit save. And also let's refresh the page to make sure that the system is refreshed. And then go back to workspace, go back to tags. And if you have enabled the consent overview, you should have this icon right here. And if you hover over it, it even says consent overview. And if you open this up, here is where you manage the consent per tag. So before we move on, I want to make clear that in this tutorial, I'm going to use basic consent mode. So within consent mode, there are two flavors, basic consent mode and advanced consent mode. Basic consent mode is basically the best option if you have a low traffic site. It also gives for the smoothest learning experience. It's the easiest one to explain. So I'm going to cover that here. If you have a high traffic website or you have a high Google Ads budget, I recommend that you use advanced consent mode. Please go ahead into the premium tutorial for that. I cover that in depth, what it is and how you set it up. But in this shorter tutorial, I'm going to cover basic consent mode, again, because it's the smoothest learning experience and it's the best one for low traffic sites with smaller budgets. The main goal of this section here is that we're going to move all the tags that are listed here under consent not configured, and we're going to move those over to this section, consent configured. And we can do that by ticking these boxes and then applying consent checks to those tags. And I like to do this per platform. So I'm gonna tick the boxes for all my Google Analytics tags first. And I'm gonna go into the consent settings for these tags. And right now, these are set to not set. And that's why they are in the consent not configured section. And we can move those over by either choosing no additional consent required or require additional consent for tag to fire. In this case, I have selected my Google Analytics tags and I'm gonna say, okay, we want to require additional consent. I'm gonna add required consent and I'm gonna say analytics storage is required for these tags to fire. So let's choose this, let's hit save. Again, let's hit save. And now the Google Analytics tags are moved over to the consent configured. And I see that under additional consent that these tags require analytics storage for them to fire. Okay, now let's move over into our marketing tags. So Google Ads, let's do that first. Google Ads tags, they require ad storage, marketing consent. So let's edit consent settings. Let's require additional consent and let's set this to ad storage. So now these tags require ad storage before they can load. Let's hit save. Let's do the same for our meta ads tags. So again, these require marketing consent. So we're going to say require additional consent. And we're going to set this to ad storage. Let's hit save. And now both meta ads and Google Ads are moved from the consent not configured window into the consent configured window. And if we look closely, we see that Google Ads and meta ads both have ad storage as a additional consent check. So the ad storage needs to be present for these tags to load. We also have two consent mode tags, and these don't need consent because they need to be loaded regardless if there's consent, yes or no, because these manage the consent itself. So we're going to go in, we're going to set this to no additional consent required. So these are necessary for the setup to work. So we're going to set this to no additional consent required. I'm going to hit save. And now the consent not configured is empty and everything is moved over to consent configured. Let me show you what this does. So I'm going to go back into preview mode. Let me just quickly reset the cookie banner. So I'm going to go into my console, Clearcookie.reset. Let's hit preview mode one more time to start with a clean slate. Yeah, here we are. The cookie banner is open. And here we're currently on the first visit. This is the scenario where I use Lens on the site. It hasn't accepted or denied cookies, but there is no consent yet. Let's move over into the timeline. We're first loading our default command. So everything is set to denied. And our update command is also set to denied. So on initialization, all pages, the current state is set to denied. Let's look at our tags at this moment. And now we see that the tags are actually obeying the consent signal. So the tags are currently blocked by consent settings. And if I press accept all, and at this stage I still need to do a manual refresh, We're going to fix that in the next section, but at this stage I need to refresh the page in order for the consent settings to update. So I have my first page and then the refreshed page. So let's go into initialization all pages here. At this stage, the current state is set to granted because it's reading from the cookie banner and it's seeing that I've accepted all cookies. So now the consent state is granted on all categories. And if I go into the tags loaded on initializational pages, I see that all my tags, all my base tags are currently firing. And this is how I can verify that the setup is working so far. The only downside is that I still need a full refresh for all these settings to apply to the page. And that's what we're going to fix in the next section. All right, we've just implemented the 3-step formula. We've implemented the consent checks on the individual tags. The next part of the setup is to do what I call a tag reload. And the tag reload is there for the first page of the visit. Let me show you this. Let's reset the cookie banner one more time. Let's go into console and let's do clearcookie.reset with 2 brackets to reset the cookie banner. And let's hit preview to refresh the page. Right now, for the consent to load, it needs a full refresh. And what we want is, if a user accepts all, we want all our tags to apply immediately. Why do we want that? Well, we want that because all our traffic source information is present on the first page. And if we only load consent on the second page of our visit, we're going to lose a lot of that traffic information. We're going to lose the refer, UTM tags, click identifiers. Those things are lost if we wait to the second page. And that's why we need a tag reload in our setup. Well, to do a tag reload, I'm going to go into the tag assistant and you see that as soon as I click accept all cookies, there is a Clearcookie save preferences data layer push. We're going to use this to initialize a tag reload. You need to know that a tag reload consists of 2 parts. First, we're going to apply the new settings to our page. So we're going to refresh the consent signals and then we're going to reload our base tags. So those 2 parts need to happen in a tag reload. Let's start with the first one. We're going to reload our consent signals. So we're going to use this data layer event to do that. Let's move over to Google Tag Manager. Let's go into consent mode update. Let me open that up and let's copy this and let's call this AD04 update reload. So we're going to apply the new settings to the page, so to speak. So the settings here are exactly the same as before, except for we're going to tick this box, push data layer event. So this will let us know as soon as the consent update is applied to the page. We're going to remove this. It doesn't really make sense in this tag to have a priority. And then as a trigger, we're going to remove the consent initialization trigger and we're going to make a new trigger based on the Clearcookie save preferences. This is loaded exactly right after a user has accepted all cookies. So I'm going to say save cookie preferences. Trigger configuration, I'm going to use the custom event and I'm going to paste in Clearcookie save preferences. Let's hit save. So this is the first part of our tag reload. Let's hit save. Let me reset the cookie banner again. And let's hit preview again to simulate the first visit again. Yeah, there you go. So we're now on event number 14. And if I press accept all, we see that there is a Clearcookie save preferences. Here, this is where we do the first part of our tag reload, where we're reloading our consent signals. We're basically letting the page know, okay, the settings have been updated. So before that, the settings are set to denied. And here, after we're loading the consent update tag, it needs a little bit of time, but if it's done, the GTM consent update event is loaded. And on this stage, all our signals, all our categories are set to granted. And this is also the event that we're going to use for our second part of our tag reload, which is to reload all our base tags. So let's do that also. So I'm going to go back into Google Tag Manager. Let's open up the first base tag in my setup, which is Google Analytics, Google Tag. And we're going to keep the initialization all pages trigger, but I want to add a second trigger to this. So let's do that. Let's make a new trigger. Let's call this tag reload. And then the trigger configuration, I'm going to again choose the custom event and I'm going to paste the GTM consent update right here. Let's hit save. Let's apply the same trigger to the other base tags as well. So let's go into Google Ads, Google Tag. Let me apply it here as well. So tag reload, save, and the last base tag that I have is the meta ads page view tag. Let's go in. And again, I'm keeping the initialization all pages trigger on here, but I'm adding the tag reload trigger to this tag. Let's hit save. Let me reset the cookie banner first. Clearcookie.reset. The cookie banner is now reset. Let's hit preview to test if our setup is working. Alright, this is the first visit scenario where I use a lens on my site. The consent on initialization, all our tags are blocked because the consent settings are set to denied. And now if I press accept all, I see that the settings are saved. So the first part of the tag reload is to let the page know, hey, these are the new settings. So I'm doing that first on consent mode update reload, and then on GTM consent update. Those settings are now applied. So all our signals are set to granted, and I'm reloading my base tags. So Google Analytics, Meta Ads, and Google Ads. And this is how I ensure that on the first page of a visit, the tags are immediately applied after a user has given consent for marketing and for analytics. And that is how you set up a robust cookie banner and consent mode implementation. Now we've covered a lot of ground today, but naturally I had to leave out some specific scenarios to keep this video manageable. If you found this helpful, but you want absolute certainty that your data is 100% accurate and compliant, you should definitely check out my premium course. It covers everything that we did today, but goes much deeper into troubleshooting and advanced setups. I've even included a bonus module on how to configure popular consent management platforms like CookieBot, CookieYes, and CookieFirst. You are covered regardless of the tool that you use. You can find the link right below in the video description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.